Evening, everybody. I've got another little question that somebody's asked me. Bruce, who's a client, an existing client already, has asked a really good question, and I thought I would do a little video to reply rather than just replying personally to him. I thought the reply could be beneficial to anybody else that's watching the video, or at least some of you. So I've got the question here from Bruce, and this is what Bruce has asked, okay? Hi Roddy, I'm curious with how long Jax is his Labrador, an excellent, very obedient Labrador, really not any issues at all. Bruce had got me for Jax sharpening up his recall. Jax is completely remote collar trained, okay? And he said, I'm curious with how long Jax needs his ecollar for. I've spoken to a few folk that didn't need them after a few months. Any reason why Jack still needs his 50% of the time after 5 months? Okay, now, first thing to know, I'll take these off so you don't have to see the glare in there again. First thing, you have to know Bruce and anyone else that's watching is Jack's already, he is not aggressive with other dogs. There's no badness, he doesn't really have any other issues. It was just to sharpen his recall. So, and now his recall is like bomb proof. Now, whether you have to verbally recall audio or whether you have to physically communicate with the dog, which would be remote collar, he'll always come back to one or other. So he's got 100% recall, just he's got a few ways of communicating with the dog, okay? So the goal, well, my goal always the goal is to be able to have a naked dog, okay? So a dog that doesn't need, or you don't rely in general in everyday life on a remote collar or a leash or anything else. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't have those tools on your dog, but they're more there to maybe abide by law, or they're there for aesthetic reasons, like you're by a road, for example, and you trust your dog, and your dog's generally great, but dogs aren't robots, so anything can happen. But in this case, how I would answer Bruce is he's 5 months in and he's using the ecollar 50% of the time. So what I'm reminding you of, Bruce, remember, is when we start remote collar training, we're teaching the dog how to escape the negative reinforcement, okay, or to create negative reinforcement themselves, which is the dog learns. We provide this brand new sensation, this touching to the dog. Remember the dinging in the car? Remember the analogy we give? So you drive around with your seatbelt on, you hear a dinging in your car. So that reminds you to put your seatbelt on, and then you go, that feels better. Okay, that's called negative reinforcement. So, or you put the seatbelt on is called negative reinforcement, as opposed to positive reinforcement, which is where you are adding something, the treat, for example, to reinforce a behavior, to make it happen again, to feel better. So when you're first teaching remote collar, or anything, to be honest, generally with a dog, you're generally using negative reinforcement. I'm teaching a dog to sit, use negative reinforcement, or to lie down, or leash pressure, to walk nice on a leash. It's all negative reinforcement. It's reinforcement based. So we teach a dog how to escape the tapping. Okay, so we provide a very gentle tap to the dog, and the dog, even though it's nothing painful or anything to the dog, but it's brand new, so the dog's like, what the heck is this? So we teach the dog by showing them how to escape, or effectively put their seatbelt on to get rid of the tapping. So the routine that we follow is always remote collar sensation first. Tap, 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 tap. When the dog responds to the collar, routine I do is name, command, affection. So, Jax, come, good job, boom. Positive reinforcement. Every dog's slightly different. Sometimes after Jax, sometimes after come. depends where I'll relieve the pressure. To be honest, it depends on how much the dog knows how much I'm gonna hold them accountable. So Jack's, when you're first starting, you've been using remote collar, relieving pressure, dog's coming. The dog now, you should be at a stage where you're always using e-collar and then associating the verbal and marking that. Okay, good, that's what you've done, and the dog has an understanding. So then when you go into this intermittent phase, what you're doing is you're kind of going through 4 stages, and this is what you need to do more of right now to be able to wean the dog off the collar. And I know you're not against collar and you're happy to wear it the whole life. The whole point is that you're saying, well, I'm starting to kind of use it 50% of the time. So that's where he's at a stage where anytime the key thing to remember here is every time you use that remote collar, he is 100%. He responds every time. Okay, so he understands the collar. But then you need to now switch into the intermittent phase, which is sometimes where you're going to be like normal. You're going to be e-collar and then vocal. Then you can also be e-collar, no vocal. Call that a non-verbal recall. Okay. You could do that right now. Your dog will do that. You probably do bits of that. You can also do vocal and then e-collar. And then you can also do vocal with no e-collar. Okay, and the goal is to then mix that up and use it. So basically the tapping, the physical stimulus is associated in almost the same as the audio stimulus. Okay, then you can wean off. But when you're first teaching, you're using escape, you're teaching the dog how to get rid of the pressure that's already there. Then you're moving into what we call avoidance, which is you're teaching the dog how to avoid any physical stimulus if they listen to your vocal. Okay, so I would play about more in that area, right, where I'd be doing more of in particular the other 3, non-verbal recall, so using e-collar and having the dog recall, and still then marking that, of course, still rewarding that, etc. Then shouting the dog with no e-collar, and sometimes shouting the dog, and even as the dog's coming to you, you can use e-collar, just tap, momentary. But also you could, the key part is especially in distraction areas. After escape, the main 2 areas, escape and avoidance. You're going to teach, as I say, you're going to teach the dog to avoid the stimulus. Now, generally that is also associated with positive punishment, so telling the dog off, all right, adding something to stop the behavior. And that's when we use the remote collar to punish a behavior. So I call that the speeding ticket. So if I don't listen to the speed camera and I observe it and I see the 30 mile an hour sign, and then I choose to ignore that, and then I see the warning that this could be a speed camera sign and I ignore that, then I'm going to get punished because I'm maybe speeding, and I'm going to get punished through that by getting a ticket, okay, getting pulled over or getting one through the door. That would be the positive punishment, because I could have avoided that if I'd listened to the visual stimuli beforehand. And because I didn't, for whatever reason, I was enjoying speeding, then you know what? You get a punishment for that, and you should be held accountable for that. So if I already have the knowledge, which your dog Jax does, then use the collar more, or you'll get to a point where you're only using really collar for avoidance, okay? Which is where you'll be vocal, and if the dog doesn't respond, you will use remote collar to say, no, I'm not asking, I'm telling, and to associate. Okay, and that's absolutely appropriate and absolutely acceptable. And ultimately, to be honest, let's not kid on. Anyone that's got a remote collar, they've got the remote collar so that they can, when they get into those, or if they do get into those scenarios, they have the ability to switch from I'm not asking, I'm telling, and keep things safe and guaranteed. That's ultimately why anyone gets a remote collar. And anyone that says different is kind of not telling the truth. Because there are many other tools that can do the asking and have a great association. Okay, every other tool pretty much, your clickers and your whistles and your verbal shouts and things like that. But the e-collar is taught in the main the same way, okay? A lot of negative reinforcement to positive reinforcement, but the collar has the ability to switch, to go, I'm now not asking, I'm telling, all right? So if you want your voice to become more powerful, your verbal commands, the dog actually listens to it, you're going to do some non-verbal recalls, just using ecollar and not using vocal. You're going to use some vocal and no ecollar. And then you're also going to use vocal. And if the dog doesn't respond, I personally, I'm like, Jax, 1, 2, no, 2, that's it, too long. Then I would use remote collar. But I would use the remote collar at a higher level, your distraction level, okay? So, and the distraction level is dependent on the level of distraction. So that doesn't mean I'm talking, you blast the dog or put it at 100 or anything like that. But what you have to do is go higher with the collar, okay? So that you actually make it slightly unpleasant. It's the speeding ticket. So the dog actually learns to avoid that, and if they listen to your voice. So then you switch and become the helper. Initially you're teaching the dog, then you're helping the dog, and say, listen, you listen to this, you avoid this. And that makes the dog much more respectful of your voice, and much sharper to waiting for it. And then you still do the same thing. Dog comes, even if you've had to use it in avoidance. Dog comes, I know that was really hard for you, pal. Good job, well done. You still do all that like normal, but you're switching it and use the collar the other way around. If you do that, you're gonna start using the collar less and less, which is totally acceptable. And then you'll be weaning the dog off the collar. Okay, hope that helps.